Hey, where are you now? The ceremony is about to start. I raised my voice, interrogating my smartphone. Today is my beloved daughter Stephanie's wedding. Next to me is Stephanie, dressed in a pure white wedding gown. The guests are about to arrive, but my husband, son, and in-laws are not here. So I put the phone on speaker and called my husband to ask when he and the others would arrive at the venue. We found a last-minute cancellation for a flight yesterday, got it super cheap, and came to Hot Springs in Arizona. I was stunned by my husband's cheerful words. Does he realize how many miles away Arizona is from here? The wedding is about to start. It's our daughter's wedding. My in-laws have always favored their son excessively while treating our daughter poorly. So I thought they might not be that eager to attend today's wedding, but I can't believe they pulled something like this. It's unbelievable. I can't even find words to say. Astonishment, disappointment, emptiness. Various emotions came and went. Okay, have fun. That's all I said before ending the call. On the sunny day when my daughter becomes a bride, how could they do this? My husband, who is Stephanie's father, and my son, her brother, are both utterly disgraceful. However, Mom, let's start the ceremony now. Stephanie smiled broadly in her beautiful dress. It's okay. I wasn't entirely unprepared for this. Leave it to me. I am Amy, a 50-year-old office worker. I live with my husband Sam, who is the same age, our 24-year-old son John, and our 23-year-old daughter Stephanie. We live in a metropolitan city, and everyone in the family has a job, so we all lead busy lives. My parents live about an hour's drive away, but Sam's parents live just a few minutes away on foot. When we got married, Sam insisted that living close to his parents would make it easier to get support while raising our children, so we bought a house here. Sam even tried to move forward with the assumption that we would live with his parents, but I opposed that idea, and that's how we ended up with our current arrangement. I had no intention of quitting my job, and while I knew balancing work and household chores would be tough, I felt that living with Sam's parents would make it impossible for our family to maintain its own lifestyle. Honestly, I always felt that my mother-in-law, a housewife, treated her home like her own personal kingdom. If I moved in as a daughter-in-law, I knew I would have a hard time. Sam's parents held somewhat old-fashioned beliefs, thinking that women should stay at home once married and that the eldest son should be the most valued. So when I married Sam, they often made snide remarks about me not quitting my job, and they constantly pressured me to have a son. I felt deeply relieved that I didn't have to live with them. About 6 months after we got married, I found out I was pregnant, and when we learned the baby was a boy, my father-in-law, mother-in-law, and husband were overjoyed. Furthermore, Amy, you have your job, right? I'll take care of the baby, so don't worry, my mother-in-law said with a smile. After all the snide remarks about how wrong it was for me to work, her change in attitude was astonishing. In reality, after the baby was born, my mother-in-law came to our house every day. She was overly enthusiastic about caring for my son and would stay for long hours, so I couldn't relax at all, I couldn't get proper sleep, and I was constantly exhausted. Even when she came to our house, she was all over my son and didn't help with the housework, so I had to do everything myself despite not having fully recovered. I often thought that it would be easier to be alone with the baby from the start since I had to do everything myself anyway, but I couldn't bring myself to tell my mother-in-law that she was being a nuisance. Because of this, I stopped producing breast milk early. It was clearly due to lack of sleep and stress. At first, I was depressed. Breastfeeding was a happy time for me, a precious moment to bond with my baby without interference from my mother-in-law. However, I changed my mindset, thinking it was convenient. It was true that the baby refusing anything other than breast milk could be a problem when I had to leave him with someone. Even before John was born, it was decided that my mother-in-law would take care of him, and I felt it would be easier to go back to work than to have her come to our house every day. So I returned to work 2 months after giving birth. As a working mother, I was grateful to have someone to take care of my child. Finding a daycare was difficult, and the fees were high. Having my mother-in-law take care of him for a small token fee at a house just a short distance away was a great deal. I was thankful for her help, but I started to feel uneasy. John spent all day at my in-laws' house and only came home to sleep. Even when I went to pick him up after work, my mother-in-law would say, "You don't need to take him yet, do you?" and wouldn't let him go. Even on my days off, she would come to our house and say, "I'll take care of him, Amy, you rest," and hold John. It was clear that my mother-in-law was obsessed with John and seemed to be trying to take him away from me. And I realized it wasn't just my imagination after I had my daughter, Stephanie, a year and a half later. When Stephanie was born and I returned to work, I left both children with my in-laws, but there was a noticeable difference in how they were treated. My mother-in-law was always with John and ignored Stephanie, leaving her in the crib without even looking at her. When I picked them up after work, she wouldn't let go of John but would tell me to take Stephanie home. Even if Stephanie cried, she wouldn't hold her and would prioritize playing with John. The difference in treatment became apparent when John started talking, but it wasn't just because Stephanie was still a baby. My in-laws and husband doted on John, calling him the precious heir and spoiling him endlessly. In contrast, they were indifferent to Stephanie, treating her like heir, and whenever they did speak to her, it was to tell her to obey John. If the two children fought, Stephanie would be scolded regardless of the reason or cause. John was always prioritized, and if he wanted something Stephanie had, my in-laws would take it from her and give it to him. They revered John as the eldest son and expected Stephanie to sacrifice and obey him. This dynamic persisted from their early childhood into adulthood. Of course, I found this upbringing absurd and repeatedly appealed to my husband. I wanted them to be treated equally. I asked him to convey this to his parents. However, my husband wouldn't listen. On the contrary, he would only say, "John is the eldest son, so it's only natural." As an only child and the eldest son, he had been spoiled like a king, so he believed that this was the way things should be. He thought the eldest son should be prioritized in everything and that women should naturally follow men. No matter how many times I explained, he couldn't understand, and I was shocked that he held such views without any doubt. I had married Sam believing he was a confident, reliable man who valued his parents. But in reality, his confidence was not based on effort but on an inflated ego from being spoiled, and he turned out to be a mama's boy. I now regret my own immaturity for not seeing this before marriage. Realizing things couldn't go on like this, I tried to separate John and Stephanie from my in-laws. I told them that daycare could take care of the children until I finished work and enrolled both in a daycare. However, my husband, using the excuse that my mother-in-law wanted to pick them up, contacted the daycare and had my mother-in-law take the children home during my working hours. She even tried to take John home while leaving Stephanie at the daycare, causing trouble with the daycare staff, leading to our children being asked to leave since they had an alternative caregiver. The same thing happened with the after-school program at the elementary school, and we couldn't use it because my mother-in-law insisted on taking care of John. I thought that once they were a bit older, they could stay home alone, and we wouldn't need to rely on my in-laws. But my in-laws kept spoiling John to keep him close. They used sweet words and gifts to draw him in, painting me and Stephanie as the bad guys and making John see them and my husband as his allies. Raised in such an environment, John was heavily influenced by my in-laws and husband. He demanded anything he wanted from them, and they indulged him. On the other hand, he started talking down to me and Stephanie more and more. He would issue commands and throw tantrums if we didn't comply. If I refused his demands or scolded him, he would immediately seek help from my husband or in-laws. John grew up this way and barely put any effort into job hunting, eventually getting a job at my husband's company through his connections. My husband proudly said he had asked the president directly, but I worried whether John could handle the job properly. In stark contrast, my daughter Stephanie did thorough industry research from her junior year in college, visited various companies, and finally received an offer from a company where she could do the work she wanted. Incidentally, my in-laws gave a brand-name suit and shoes as a graduation gift to John, but nothing to Stephanie. Not even a congratulatory word. I had seen how hard Stephanie worked, so I sincerely told her, "Well done, congratulations," and treated her to a nice meal and bought her a bag for commuting to celebrate. I believed her efforts and achievements deserved praise. By this point, Stephanie was used to our in-laws' behavior and didn't seem to care, but as a parent, it was still hard to accept that my children were being treated so differently. A few years after Stephanie started working, she decided to marry a senior colleague from the same company. The young man who came to greet us seemed kind and seemed to cherish Stephanie. I remember feeling reassured, seeing Stephanie's serene smile as they looked at each other, thinking they would surely build a happy home together. The young couple had meticulously planned their wedding, choosing a venue that fit their budget and realizing their wishes. As her parents, there was little for me to do. I just asked if there was anything I could help with. Incidentally, my husband, son, and in-laws seemed uninterested in Stephanie's wedding. Stephanie handled inviting them, so I didn't know the details, but seeing her simply say, "I invited them," without elaborating, I could easily guess it was the same old story. It's disgraceful that they showed such disinterest in the wedding of our beloved daughter. I often think I should have divorced much earlier. I had heard that divorce is difficult and was hesitant to make such a significant change, but their attitude is disrespectful to Stephanie and her husband. At the very least, I want to support Stephanie as much as I can so she can start her new life happily. On the day of Stephanie's wedding, the venue was a specialized one that hosts only one wedding per day, with a ceremony starting at noon, but the bride and groom were busy from the morning, preparing themselves. Therefore, I took on the responsibilities of preparing to welcome the guests, greeting friends who came to help, and other related tasks. As the mother of the bride, this was only natural. In fact, since the couple had prepared everything so well on their own, I was happy to help with at least this much. I arrived at the venue early to get dressed and familiarize myself with the layout, which allowed me to see my daughter in her beautiful dress first, a privilege that brought me joy. Despite the busy schedule, I moved with a happy heart. However, as the time to receive guests approached, my husband, son, and in-laws were still nowhere to be seen. They didn't have specific roles, so arriving with the general guests would have been acceptable. But, as a family, I had hoped my husband and son would be present to welcome the guests. Mom. Stephanie, in her wedding dress, called out to me in the waiting area. "Have Dad and the others arrived?" "No, not yet." "Should I call them?" I needed to go greet the guests soon. Annoyed that they couldn't act like family on such an important day, I took out my phone and called my husband, putting it on speaker so Stephanie could hear. The phone rang. I was relieved that the call went through. "Hello? Where are you?" "The ceremony is about to start." "We're in Arizona." "What? Did he just say Arizona?" "There was a last-minute cancellation on a flight yesterday, and it was super cheap, so we came to the hot springs in Arizona," my husband said cheerfully. "Yesterday? But today is Stephanie's wedding day." "Today is Saturday, right? We've taken Monday off, so we'll be here until then." "Who is with you?" "Mom and Dad, and John." That Monday off was supposed to be for seeing Stephanie's in-laws off. Her parents lived far away and had come here just for this wedding. Since we couldn't meet them before the wedding, we had planned to have lunch together after the ceremony to formally introduce ourselves before they left. "So, knowing what's happening today, you still went to Arizona?" "John wanted to go to the hot springs since we got the flight at such a good price. So, we had no choice but to go, right, John?" Stephanie let out a deep sigh at her father's words. "Forget it," she muttered, looking up at the sky. Since the phone was on speaker, everyone around us could hear the conversation, and the staff started murmuring, understanding the situation. Being in Arizona now meant there was no way they could make it to the wedding. Stephanie asked her attendant, who was standing nearby, to call the planner. She was likely going to inform them that her father and brother wouldn't be attending. To think that, right before the wedding, the bride would have to deal with such distress and inconvenience. "We're having a great time, you know? Family trip to the hot springs." my husband said excitedly, and I could hear John laughing in the background. It was clear who he considered family. Stephanie and I were not included. I felt something snap inside me. Okay. Enjoy yourselves, I said, ending the call immediately. There was no point in continuing the conversation. I couldn't find words. Astonishment, disappointment, emptiness. Various emotions came and went. Mom, let's start the ceremony as planned, Stephanie said. Just like this. With the family seats left empty. It's okay. I wasn't entirely unprepared for this. Leave it to me, she said with a confident smile in her beautiful dress. I felt a mix of guilt and pride. Stephanie is my pride and joy. In the end, the ceremony and reception proceeded without the bride's brother, father, or paternal grandparents. There were moments when the groom's side and guests noticed the empty seats and murmured, but the couple continued with happy smiles. And now, a letter from the bride, Stephanie. The MC announced, and the lights dimmed, focusing a spotlight on Stephanie. Thank you all for taking the time to attend our wedding today, Stephanie began in a clear voice, standing in front of the microphone, holding her letter. I would like to start by addressing the empty seats on my family's side. I deeply apologize for the absence of my father, brother, and paternal grandparents. I am truly sorry for this. She apologized, and the room fell silent. To those who are close to me, this is already known, but I have grown up without being acknowledged by them. Although I sent the invitations and received their confirmations, they decided to go on a trip to the hot springs in Arizona yesterday. They even told me just before the ceremony that they would be there until Monday, using their vacation days. The truth caused a wave of murmurs throughout the venue. Indeed, it was something unimaginable in normal circumstances. It pained me to see Stephanie having to say such things on her special day. However, for me, this wasn't unexpected. In fact, I see this as a good opportunity for everyone to know the truth. After all, it's obvious who is being unreasonable here, right? Stephanie's playful remark brought a soft laughter from the audience, lightening the mood a bit. I couldn't help but admire my daughter's strength and poise as she spoke confidently, shaping the atmosphere of the venue. Despite having seen such poor examples in her father and grandparents, she grew up to be a strong and independent woman. They have always belittled me and my mother, treating us poorly. When I was younger, it did hurt at times, but my mother always stood up for me and protected me. Stephanie glanced at me. Now, I understand that while I thought I was protecting her, she was also supporting me. I could get through it all because Stephanie was always by my side. Sorry for the long preface, but now I would like to read the letter I prepared. This letter was completed before yesterday, with the assumption that there would be no empty seats in the family section. Please keep that in mind as you listen. Stephanie opened the letter she held. Next to her stood her husband, looking at her gently with a supportive gaze. Stephanie's voice filled the room as she began reading the letter slowly. She expressed her gratitude to everyone present and her joy in getting married. After a pause, she continued reading. I've written down the feelings of gratitude that I usually can't express. Please listen. Mom, I've seen you always busy with work and housework since I was a child. You always faced me with love, and I never felt lonely. You made nutritious and delicious meals and were always there for advice on makeup and fashion. You are the most reliable and admired woman I know. From before I can remember, Grandpa, Grandma, Dad, and John often said things like, "You should have been born a boy, and an unwanted child should at least be useful to the eldest son," but every time, you would hug me and say, "Stephanie is my treasure, and let's find many things you love and enjoy them together." Even though you were treated harshly by Grandma and Grandpa, you always smiled to protect me. I am truly grateful and respect you so much for that. Because you poured so much love into me, I was able to remain kind and happy despite the horrible things said and done by Grandpa, Grandma, Dad, and John. Thank you so much. No matter how many times I say it, it won't be enough. I love you and am so grateful. From now on, I will protect you. I will return the love you gave me with even more love. The only person I could call family was always you. Now that I am married, my family will grow. Let's enjoy and be happy together." Seeing Stephanie smile at me like that, I was overwhelmed with tears. She has grown into such a kind person, and I couldn't be more grateful. While Stephanie expressed her gratitude towards me, I felt the same way about her. I want her to experience abundant happiness with her husband and the children they will have in the future. That would be the best way to repay my love. As Stephanie finished reading her letter, a warm applause filled the room and lingered for a long time. The wedding was nearing its climax, and the only thing left was the final send-off. The newlyweds and their parents exited the venue first and lined up at the entrance to bid farewell to the guests. "Mom, what did you think of the letter?" As we followed the staff's instructions to find our spots, Stephanie asked me this. "I loved it. It's another treasure for me. I poured all my true feelings into it." "Thank you." "You're welcome. I was planning to read it in front of those who didn't show up today." Yes, Stephanie had mentioned that. The letter was written assuming her father and brother would be present. I wondered how it would have turned out if they had actually been there. I had already told his parents everything. I thought they might need to know, and I intended to read this letter from the start. Through Stephanie and her husband, his parents smiled warmly at me. "You've been through a lot. If there's anything we can do, even through Stephanie, please let us know." Their kind words warmed my heart. I hadn't expected such understanding. Caught up in work and managing the household, I had barely managed to get through the suffocating days. I focused solely on protecting Stephanie and standing up to unfair treatment, without considering changing the situation or asking for help. The world might have been kinder than I thought. A realization brought to me by Stephanie. "Thank you. I am truly a fortunate mother." During the send-off, many guests voiced their complaints about my husband and in-laws as they left. Especially Stephanie's friends, who praised her resilience, and some even shed tears of support for her. Apparently, Stephanie had shared her family situation with her longtime friends, and they had been supporting her through her struggles. They had been prepared to stand by her side if anything happened during the reception. Stephanie is fortunate to have such wonderful friends. Moreover, the guests expressed kind words and support towards me, and it was striking that hardly anyone reacted to our scandalous family revelations with discomfort. Everyone was genuinely kind. It is likely that Stephanie and her husband's personalities attracted such good people. I am so proud of my daughter and grateful for her wonderful husband. This wedding has been the happiest event for me, thanks to Stephanie. "Hey, what did you say to the boss?" Right after seeing Stephanie's in-laws off and parting ways with Stephanie and her husband on Monday, my phone rang. As soon as I answered, my husband shouted this line. "What are you talking about? Why are John and I in home detention?" My husband seemed furious, but there was no way this home detention could be my fault. It was another baseless accusation. Well, the boss did tell me a bit about it. Didn't the boss explain the reason? So you did say something unnecessary. Did you go out of your way to tattle on us? He was at Stephanie's wedding, so there was no tattling involved. Why did you even invite him? He's our neighbor, he's always been helpful, and his youngest daughter is Stephanie's senior at work. It's not that strange, is it? The boss and his family were indeed our neighbors. Since my husband did nothing at home, he probably didn't know that the boss and his wife actively participated in community activities, like weeding, festivals, and children's events, so I often saw and talked with them. Most importantly, Stephanie decided to invite them to the wedding. Looking back, I realize it was also to let the boss see the true nature of my husband and son. During the send-off at the wedding, the boss was furious with my husband and John. He found out about the mistreatment my daughter and I had endured and was outraged by their absence at the wedding and their trip to Arizona. He declared that he would report this to the company president. It seems my husband and John didn't have a good reputation at work either. There were rumors that they disregarded female employees' opinions in meetings and treated women unfairly, though no formal complaints had been filed. Where there's smoke, there's usually fire, but the actual issues remain concealed. It's likely that my husband, given his position, might have used his authority to suppress any dissent from younger employees. The boss seemed to realize that their behavior was a significant character flaw. Even though John was just a regular employee, such conduct could become a serious issue. My husband, in a supervisory position, could not be allowed to act in a way that contradicted the company's values. The boss mentioned that the president publicly condemned any form of discrimination and assured that my husband and John would face consequences. This is ridiculous. What are we supposed to do now? It's your own fault. What did you say? Who else would it be? So where are you now? We just got off the plane. We were almost home when the boss called. From my husband's words, I could tell they would be home in about an hour. I was glad I had already packed and left. Stephanie is moving into her new place, and I'm going back to my parents' house. Your parents' house? The divorce papers are on the table. Please sign them. What? You'll be contacted by my lawyer later. Goodbye. Hey! I hung up the phone without listening to my husband's response. Thanks to Stephanie's actions, the misdeeds of my in-laws and husband were exposed. I decided to stop enduring it any longer. I am going to live freely and happily. Later, I received a call from the boss's wife, who informed me about the outcome. An internal investigation at the company revealed that my husband and son had been regularly making derogatory remarks about women. The president, upon learning about their behavior and their absence at Stephanie's wedding, declared, "I can't trust someone who doesn't value their family," and demoted and reduced their salaries. It was truly their own fault. Shortly after these penalties were imposed, my husband called me. "You've caused a huge mess for us." Again, he was shifting the blame and taking his anger out on me. I sighed, weary of his repetitive behavior. "It's your own fault. By the way, did you file the divorce papers?" "I never agreed to a divorce." I had anticipated this reaction. My in-laws and husband are very concerned about their public image. They try to cover up their wrongdoings and are willing to lie to maintain appearances. However, I doubt they can hide this time. The boss's wife had mentioned that the story from Stephanie's wedding had already spread among the neighbors. My lawyer will handle it. There is no option other than divorce. And you will pay alimony. Alimony? Why? For the years of emotional distress. I don't have that kind of money. But you're working, aren't you? In our household, my husband covered the house expenses, and I paid for groceries and other living costs. I had no idea how much he had saved, but I assumed he had enough since we were both working. However, from what I gathered, he had been spending lavishly, buying a new car for our son, expensive suits, and going on trips with his parents. It seemed he wanted to rely on my income and hence was even more opposed to the divorce. This is ridiculous. Amy, reconsider this whole divorce thing, will you? Don't call me by my name. It's disgusting. What the? I'm definitely getting a divorce. And I will get alimony. Be prepared. With that, I ended the call. It took some time, but I finally got the divorce and the alimony. Through my lawyer, I conveyed that if he didn't agree to the divorce, I would take it to court, and he quickly agreed to a settlement. He must have realized that dragging it out in court would be bad for his reputation. By the way, my husband and son found it difficult to stay at the company and ended up resigning voluntarily. My husband now juggles multiple part-time jobs to cover living expenses and alimony. However, his income is limited, and he had to cut costs, so he put the house up for sale and moved in with his parents along with our son. Our son, who had been pampered and had high self-esteem, became a recluse, refusing to leave his room or work after being looked down upon by his colleagues and laughed at by his friends. My in-laws were so shocked by the downfall of their precious son and grandson that they became bedridden. It was all their own fault. Meanwhile, Stephanie is currently pregnant and nearing her due date. I'm already looking forward to the day my grandchild is born. She's having a boy, but she said she would never let my husband and his parents meet or even know about him. Again, it's their own fault. As for me, I initially stayed at my parents' house but have since rented an apartment near my workplace and live alone. With my newfound free time, I go to the gym and often have visits from my daughter and her husband. My life is fulfilling, and I'm enjoying every day. There are still many fun and exciting things waiting for me in my life.